Well, hi everyone. This is Don Smith, and I'd like to welcome you to a delayed tip of the month. I'm listing this as late October, even though we are November 5th today, actually November 4th today. I'm recording this. But I have a good excuse. We have been in Scotland for the past 2 weeks. We, including my wife Barry, partner Ron Madra, our local guide Alex Trotsky, who we want to give a shout out to, great photographer, great guide, and our wonderful group that joined us in the Scottish Highlands. The one of the first things we did when we got to the Highlands and we started in Inverness, Scotland, is we made a trip south, about an hour and a half, 2 hours down to a beautiful castle called Eileen Donan Castle. And we actually came back to this castle the following evening when there was some clouds up in the sky. And this is what I want to teach you today. I want to show you how we go about not only shooting a scene, because we were looking right back at the sunset. And you can see I've gone ahead and I've highlighted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 bracketed shots. Now, let me click on the last one here to give you an idea of what the castle looks like. That would be my shadow exposure. And you can bracket these by 1 stop, 1 1/3, 1 2/3, 2 stops. I've heard the gamut from various instructors. For me, I just used generally 1 1/3, but because I was teaching the group here and I didn't want to confuse them any further, I told them to let's start at 1 stop brackets. And what we were starting on, let me get this up, is if you can see up here, we had a little bit of clouds around here. So we were trying to get a nice sharp sun star. I had everybody expose at f/22. Typically on a clear day, f/16 would work perfectly. But I go to 22 when there's some clouds around because it's a little softer and it tends to not get the real sharp rays of the sun. So I sort of hedge my bet at 22. And when that sun got close, I just kept telling everybody, click, 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 click. Don't stop to look. Just trust that you have to have everything in focus. That was prior to the sun getting down. Your composition had to be set. Because as we do the brackets, the worst thing you can do is change your composition. This technique is not going to work if you do that. So everybody kept clicking, 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 clicking. I had mine popping up rapidly on the back of my camera. So once I could see that my sun star had been captured and there was no more sun stars, then we stopped everybody. And I actually clicked this frame and I clicked one more. You can see it a little bit better there. And you can see there was a little bit of a jump, but that's not going to matter much because we're going to align all of these frames. And now I even shot one more. And now I'm starting to open up by a stop. And we would open up a stop and click. Open up a stop and click. Open up a stop and click. Where do I know when to stop clicking or opening up? Well, I'm watching the histogram on my camera. And when the histogram pulls off the left side, which is representing the shadow side of the exposure, then I know I've done enough clicks. A lot of times in workshops, I'll have clients who don't quite understand this. And maybe some of you don't quite understand it. So if you just set up a random, well, I'm going to do 5 frames at, let's say, 1 stop clicks, you don't know if you've captured off all of the details from here's my shadow exposure. These are 1 stop clicks till I get down to the sun star. And you can see I'm actually going to take this one out of there because I don't think we really need that one. So I'm going, first I want to take this is just for me, I put color labels on it, and I'm going to click that one off, and I'm going to start from here, shift click. So I'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 frames that I'm going to import into Lightroom. So let's go over this again because it's really critical that you understand this. This is exposing for the highlight and the sun star. When you shoot right back into the sun, that's a specular highlight. What that simply means is there's no detail to begin with, so you can't expect to get that exposed perfectly in there because there was no detail to the eye to begin with. And then I'm going to do one more there. Now we're going to open up a stop, one more stop, one more stop, and one more stop. Okay, now we've got all of these selected. I'm going to right click and I am going to come down here where it says photo merge, excuse me, and I'm going to go into HDR. And you can see I've got a couple settings here that I want on all the time. Number one, auto align. Definitely, definitely. Auto settings, yes. It's what it means there is once it creates the single frame, it's going to bump in some, and I'll show you this as we go back into Lightroom on the single frame. It'll bump in some of the tonal corrections and maybe add a little bit of vibrance. I also set usually my deghost on high. You can play around. I'm usually between medium, and high. And we did have some clouds, and those could have been moving in the scene. We definitely had water that was moving in the scene. I don't typically turn on deghost overlay. I could, and it can show you where the ghosting was going on and where it did its best to take it out. I don't create a stack. I could, but what I'm going to do is come down here to the bottom right now, and I'm going to click merge. And if you look up here in the top left, it says it's creating HDR. And hopefully it's going to put it right at the end of the highlighted frames that we used. And there it, whoops. That's not it. There it is right there. It kind of kicked that one over for some reason. Okay, let's click on, oops, let me go back. Sorry about that. There. Now, that's not a bad job, really. We've now leveraged the advantage of capturing all the tones in this scene. And one of the things I think really confuses people, I notice this in my workshops all the time, you have to remember the best sensor on the market cannot at this point in time replicate our human vision. Okay, we went through this years and years and years ago. I remember when I was a teenager with sound. I was a big stereo nut. I've mentioned this many times on these YouTubes. And we weren't quite at the range of human hearing back then. But then the audio people not only caught up to human hearing, they surpassed it. And that's why now when you listen to something with your headphones on, assuming they're really good headphones, you're hearing every recorded instrument in that song as best as you can for human hearing. Well, we go over to sight and we're not there. We're getting there. And we're still probably, I've been told 4 years ago at an event in New York, our head engineer with Sony told us at that point we might be about 10 years out. So I'm going to deduct 4 years off of that, courtesy 2.5 years to COVID. And I don't know now, we may have just lost that timing because people really couldn't work through that stretch. So we may still be about 7 to 8 years out. Something else was told to me at that time, and this is another fallacy I hear a lot of people talk about, that cameras dynamic range. And what we mean by sensors dynamic range is how, when we're in the field, what we see, and typically we talk about from brightest brights to darkest dark, we talk about that in terms of contrast range. It's simply the same thing, but it's the camera's ability to capture that contrast range, as close to what our eyes see it as possible at this point in time of the development of sensors and processors and wiring and every other component that goes in the camera. And what I was told was that sensors in and of themselves are not 100% what dictates dynamic range. It has to do with everything that's in that camera, from the processors to every component, to the wiring, to how they all interact. All of that is what's going to help not only the dynamic range, get a little bit closer to a human's contrast range, but also what tends to lessen the noise in an image also. So I hope that makes sense. I get a lot of emails and a lot of social medias on, hey, this new camera is coming out. Everybody's talking about the A7R5 if you're a Sony buff. Is it a new sensor? No, it's the same sensor, but it's a new processor, different wiring, different components. So that sensor is going to behave better than the A7R4. It is the A7R4 sensor. But don't just wrinkle your nose and say same old sensor. No, everything that's surrounding that sensor has improved. So I hope that makes sense. Let's give it time for that camera to come out and we can start running more definitive tests. Okay, let's move along with this. I'm going to take this into develop now. And here's where I wanted to show you. We had left on the auto controls in the HDR, and you can see that this is where it's correcting that finished image to the best of its ability. You can see we've got a really nice, I'm going to turn on my highlights up here. And we've got nothing clipping in the highlights, which means we are getting a little detail back there. Just a slight clip here in the shadows. I'm going to come down the blacks. You can see down on the bottom, I could lighten that up just a smidgen if I wanted to. And let's see if there's any whites. No, I'm going to push it over, and there's where the sun starts to blow. I can pull that back. This is all thanks to the bracketed frames we were doing that was able to record some detail in there where a single frame wouldn't be able to do that. Shadows, let's see. Yeah, I'm going to lighten up those shadows a little bit more, and may take down the highlights just a tad. Okay, so really the rest of this now, you can go through and you can work on this as a single file. I'm not sure. Yes, it does. It does impart your lens. I was using a 24-105. I did have a Singh-Ray neutral polarizer on. I left it on. Reason being, I wanted to control the glare not only off the foliage, but down here where I knew it was going to be really glary in the water. I wanted to control that. The one thing I might want to look at is it on the auto setting, it bumped in a little bit of contrast. I would probably use a little bit of localized contrast as I process. I'm not going to go through and process this whole image. You can watch a lot of other videos where I do that, but I would point out some things here before we close it up that I would be paying attention to. This mountain back here looks a little flat, so I would bump in some contrast back in here into the mountain. We've got a little bit of flaring going on up in here. That's easy to correct. I would probably on this, there's a method in the Tony Kuiper TK8 where I could paint in this color over here, but I know a lot of you aren't working on the TK8. So I would say just take your clone stamp out, clone it from in here or back in here where you got a dark section and work over this. Maybe not go at 100% opacity, maybe 50% and build it up until you can take that out as well as possible. And everything else in here I'm looking at, it looks really good. So that's it, guys. It's really, really simple. If I was to have used a straight graduated neutral density filter, which I still do carry and I still do use, I would have had a tough time angling it because you can see this mountain kind of peaks, and to get over into here and here, I would have had to pull it down, which would have pulled it down over this mountain. So when I get into these situations where it's just going to be difficult for a graduated neutral density filter to tame that area, I will think about going into this bracketing. It's really something you need to practice. Practice it more than once or twice. Go out at sunset on a clear day and shoot back towards the sun on a contrasty scene and try it. And try bracketing in a stop. Then try maybe 1 1/3, which is my preferred method. 1 2/3, 2 stops. I know some photographers that simply just do 2-stop brackets. It's whatever's going to be working for you, and then bring them in and play with it. And Lightroom does a great job. The last question I'll answer, because I can hear you guys thinking it out there. Why don't you use an HDR program? My thoughts, and I have used literally every HDR program I could get my hands on. Nothing tends to look as realistic as what Lightroom can put together for me. And not that this is by any means a finished image. However, it can be processed now as a single frame and brought up and balanced in the areas that I showed you and talked about to where it can look like a very good finished frame. And this is my finished image. This was actually processed on my 13-inch Macintosh laptop. I do plan on coming back. I'm going to be leaving for Patagonia tomorrow, so I didn't have time to get back in and reprocess this. It's not going to take a lot. I'm still seeing some flare up in here that I don't like, and I use a 32-inch BenQ screen. It's a brand new screen for me, and I really, really am enjoying this. And I'm going to probably go back and reprocess and get it a little bit tighter, but you can kind of see now how I brought out the shadows in here. I even think this mountain, I could probably bring up the contrast a tad bit more. Definitely tame down this flare over here. And I think everything else is looking pretty good. I may bring up some warmth right in there. Yeah, I can do that. I'm just in Lightroom here. But you see, I'm doing all these globally, which is not really the way to do it. You got to work locally on this stuff. Anyway, that's how simple this is. Next time you're faced where you're shooting into a sun or a very high contrast scene, just remember your camera cannot see the way your eyes see, not at this point in time, but this is a great, great workaround on how to get through it. Sorry I'm late with this video. We will be putting out another one probably right after Thanksgiving is over for November, so come back with that. As always, if you have any ideas on videos you'd like me to record, shoot me an email, don@donsmithphotography.com. And if it's something I think will benefit a general audience, I would be more than happy to take a look at it and put it out. And yeah, so it's all good. So off we go to Patagonia. This is going to be the way it goes here till the end of March for me. I'll be about 2 weeks out, 2 to 3 weeks in, 2 weeks out, 2 to 3 weeks in. We'll just keep on that kind of schedule all the way to the end of March. And a lot of these workshops we're doing now had been workshops that were COVID delayed, as was this Scotland workshop and the Patagonia. So until later this month, this is Don Smith. You take care.